We have the editor for the Black Agenda Report, amazing journalist, independent reporter. And I can't wait to talk to her about a few of these issues, especially with the issue with Niger, the continuing imperialism between France and the United States. Obviously, a lot is going on with Ukraine as well. So I want to welcome to Revolutionary Blackout, Margaret Kimberley, one of our favorite guests to have on. It's always great to have you on so you can take us to school. Welcome to RBN.
Thank you. Thank you both. Good to be back.
And I still think you hold the title for the guests we've had on the most frequent. I think you still hold the most interview titles. Yeah, I can't think of anybody else that we've had on more often.
Other than close people, other than like Zoya, outside of like people like Zoya, maybe
our friends, like people we know in person. Yeah, absolutely. Not just so me. You're not our friend. We do consider you a comrade.
Thank you, thank you guys.
Absolutely. So there's quite a few things that we want to cover. Obviously, the situation in Niger that is going on, and I'm gonna pull this statement. I should have pulled it up a little bit earlier. Where the Black Alliance for Peace had a statement on this, and I've been reading a lot about Nigeria, and I told you guys my general position is whenever I see what the West is talking about, wherever I see what side they're on, I tend to work backwards for my conclusion and assume they're in the wrong, and I am generally right. So with that said, I'm gonna pull the statement. I'm gonna pass it to you, and I want to get your thoughts on what's going on in Nigeria. Now, this is another United States occupation because after this coup, you have the United States military that's claiming that it's still going to stay in Nigeria despite the wishes of the new government and the will of the people that want the United States interference to end in Nigeria. Now, this is the statement from Black Alliance for Peace, and I will just read the headline. I will pass to you, Margaret Kimberley, if you want to expand more on this. All Africans should condemn the call for Ecowas-led military invasion of Niger. So, Margaret, is there anything else that you want to add to this? Anything that I'm missing? This is a story I'm still reading about and want to learn about. So I'm glad to have you on so you can kind of explain the situation more.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, it's Niger, and it's a French pronunciation. It was a former French colony, which is an issue in this story. So just to start out with a little background, there was a coup July 26th, just a couple of weeks ago. And coups, I want to start out by saying coups are very problematic. In many cases, there are governments elected by the people, and this president was elected, but that can also be problematic. That's not proof of a government that really represents its people and their rights at home and around the world. So I just want to start out by saying I'm not pro-coup. African nations, the African Union frowns upon coups because they destabilize countries. But there was a coup, and it seems as though there's popular support for this new government, a military government. But what's interesting about it, yes, and that's we reprinted an article from People's Dispatch. That's the article we reprinted in Black Agenda Report last week. It's a good article, a lot of great detail. So the new government seems to have popular support. So that's a photo, and I think the photo says "Down with France" and calls Macron a son of a bitch. And France still plays an outsized role in these former colonies. Niger has a lot of uranium. That's why France is interested in, and the US, in maintaining control there. But it's all for France. It's used for nuclear power in Europe. And people in Niger, most of them don't have electricity. So it's clear that France would not want a government that's going to change the status quo. Now, ECOWAS is a regional group of West African states. And it's very sad, but they've also become tools of the U.S. The U.S. works overtime to dominate the rest of the world. So all of these formations that are supposed to work on behalf of people all over the world, the U.S. wants to control. So ECOWAS said that they were opposed to the coup and that they might help occupy Niger. So Nigeria, the Nigerian president said that Nigerian troops, the two countries border each other, and that Nigeria might actively involve itself in Niger. So how do you know the U.S. is responsible? Well, the deposed president, Mohamed Bazoum, had an editorial in the Washington Post. And the Washington Post is one of those media outlets that speaks for the U.S. state. And he said he'd been deposed unfairly. Of course, he doesn't want to be deposed. And I can't get into all of I'm not aware of all of the issues, but the fact that the president, the deposed president, is in the Washington Post saying that the coup was wrong and the U.S. is correct to involve itself tells you all you need to know. Black Alliance for Peace, we always speak out for self-determination of nations, that every people around the world, group of people, have a right to determine their own fate, determine their own politics, and not be controlled by outside forces, which is clearly the case in Niger. Niger has a U.S. drone base, has at least one base. I don't know if you remember a few years ago when Trump was still president, that U.S. soldiers were killed in Niger. And at the time, the emphasis was on, what Trump said to a congresswoman who knew one of the families, and he was rude and racist. And it wasn't about,
I remember.
It wasn't about the U.S. being in Niger. It wasn't about the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM. It wasn't about the U.S. Claiming the right to interfere with these countries and having these dupes and stooge governments that allow the U.S. to hold sway. So I think the most important thing to be aware of is that some of these African countries who are part of ECOWAS have said, we're not going to involve ourselves, have spoken up for the rights of the Nigerian people, have said that they will not allow themselves to be used by the Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso. And I also believe the Nigerian Senate, their parliament, if you will, has also rejected the president's request for troops to be sent there. So we have to be very careful. They get people to speak on their behalf through their organs, such as the Washington Post or the New York Times or wherever. And you're right. If the U.S. is on one side, you're probably right 90% of the time to be on the other side, because the U.S. seeks to dominate the world. That's what they do.
And it's very important to realize that not all these African leaders have the best interests of the working class. Right. They are part of African bourgeoisie. But my position is, I want them to struggle against the bourgeoisie without outside support. Exactly. So if even if their bourgeoisie do not have their best interests, because this is what woke imperialists or liberal-minded imperialists would say. They would say, well, the politicians in Niger. That's what happens when I read more than I listen to the news. Okay. You guys know I always fuck things up. Niger. They would say, well, the bourgeoisie of Niger, they don't care about the working class of the country, and they would be better off with Western support, and they don't really care about the consequences. But as an anti-imperialist, I want that to be their decision to make, not the West. Thanks. Not the West. And I was very careful. That's why I didn't want to immediately comment on this. I'd rather bring on someone like Margaret Kimberley to talk about this. Because my thing is, like, as you said, is the will of the people. And I've seen so many, because there's just one I dug up real quick, where it seems like there's for the new government of Nigeria. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. You guys, and that was the article I put up from Black Agenda Report as well, where thousands rally in support of this coup. But the and our responsibility as someone who live in the West is to call out the contradictions of our government, where they saying that the fact that Niger pulled off this coup is worthy of them escalating wars. It's worthy of them occupying our country. Meanwhile, the United States, they coup people all the goddamn time.
Oh, sure. That's true. I mean, if you look at the history, one of the first presidents of the Democratic Republic of Congo was over was overthrown, Patrice Lumumba. At the end of the Eisenhower administration, Kennedy was about to become president. In a few weeks, he was murdered. He was imprisoned, murdered, and they dissolved his body in acid, he and several other people, to destroy any evidence of the crime. Kwame Nkrumah in the late 60s was deposed. The U.S. was involved there. So we could go on with all of these interferences, and you show there only Latin America, not the whole
you
world.
can't even fit it all.
That gives you an idea of what the U.S. does. So for the U.S. to wag their finger about a coup, and the U.S. does this a lot, sometimes there's a military coup, sometimes it's siding with one group of people in a country, regime change efforts, been sending money to Taiwan, or any number of places where the U.S. Makes a great effort to interfere with the rights of people around the world. And you're right, it's up to people in Niger to figure out who they want to run their country. It's up to them to struggle about that. It's not up to the US. It's not up to France. And that's the most important thing to remember. And it can get complicated, but I think if we stick to that basic belief in sovereignty of nations, the right of people to determine their fate, to determine what kind of government they have, then you don't have to worry about who you think is good or who you would or wouldn't prefer. It's up to people in Niger. It's not up to Emmanuel Macron. It's not up to Joe Biden. It's up to them. And, countries in the region, other countries are kicking out France. Mali has kicked out the French. They in order to get resources along with the U.S., they're a partner and a vassal of the U.S. So there is this trend, and I think it's a good trend to get France out. Now, of course, there's a double complication of making sure that these are governments that represent their people, but that's for their people to figure out how to do, not anybody in Washington or Paris or any place else.
Yeah, so I want to read these last few headlines and CJ, I can pass to you if you have anything you want to add, and then I want to get to another segment. CJ, I can pass to you if you have a question for Margaret as well after my next segment. But this is shit's gonna get real in Niger. Another example of the unhinged Biden and Emmanuel Macron administration, led by their puppets. And there are people in Niger. I've seen a lot of clips. I'm gonna spare you guys time, but there's so many clips of the people rallying and they almost getting ready for war. Like they warning their people about the threat of war because these people take pride in the fact that they just overthrew this Western puppet, this government that they viewed to be oppressive. Once again, I'm not putting my opinion in it. A government that they viewed to be oppressive and they overthrew, and they're very proud about that. So these people are ready to fight, and this is gonna be real, and this is gonna be a situation we're gonna continue to cover. The Niger military deployed reinforcements to capital after ignoring the deadline to see power. So they was given a deadline that if you guys don't get the government back, the corrupt Western-backed government, if you don't relinquish your power back to them, we may take military action. Now, my question to people who may side with Western forces, does that sound like people who care about the well-being of the Niger people, willing to wage war, bloody war for, they're going to be, God know how long it will take for that war to end? Like that, does that seem like people who care about them? Then that's that. And once again, as someone who was learning about this, these are the simple questions I ask myself as I'm exploring this issue. Like, does it seem like this side care about the Nigerian people? Obviously not. Mario, do you want to chime in? I saw you on mute. If you want to chime in,
sure. Should be. You're absolutely right. That should be our emphasis, not on what the U.S. wants or what the U.S. claims, but it's for people around the world to decide. And you have to, and that's where Black Agenda Report comes in, and other independent media in deciphering this information. Because if you rely on the Washington Post, they've got the deposed president in an op-ed advocating for intervention in his country. So that's why you have to be aware. Read Black Agenda Report, Black Alliance for Peace. I wear more than one hat. Black Alliance for Peace, we have a great statement today that you were just showing everyone. You can see it on our website, blackallianceforpeace.com, or on social media, on Twitter and Facebook. And I still say Twitter. But anyway,
I refuse to call it X. It's not happening. Not happening. I refuse. It won't call it X. I'm looking at you side eye.
Yeah.
But honestly, guys, I'm not bullshitting here just because Mark is here. But one of the first websites I pulled up, kind of like I need to learn more about Niger, was Black Algerian Report. I typed in Black Algerian Report in Niger. And I'm dead honest. That's why I saw this. And I reached out to Mark after reading that first article. They are a fantastic resource. That's why we asked her to come on. Why we got
let me ask a little more on the same topic before we move on. Did you hear or know about this part? And let me read this. This is Grayzo reporting along the same lines. Before leading the push for invading Niger, ECOWAS chair Balu Tanumbu spent years laundering money for heroin dealers in Chicago and has been marred in corruption scandals ever since. And it's an article that they have. Had you heard anything about this, or about at least the chairman that he's talking about in this tweet here?
I'm not aware of that. I mean, the Gray Zone usually has good reporting. It's not something they would make up out of whole cloth. So that's entirely possible. But it just gives you an indication of who the U.S. friends are, who they consider their assets. So it's not surprising to me. And it seems entirely believable. But I haven't read that for myself. So that's all I can say for now.